Welcome to the Relationships Decoding Podcast.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about something that's pretty invisible, but really leaves some deep wounds.
Okay.
Psychological bullying.
Yeah.
You know, we often focus on physical violence,
Right.
the bruises that you can see, the injuries that you can touch.
Uh-huh.
But what about the harm that comes without a single visible mark?
Yeah, that's really the crux of it, isn't it? It operates in the realm of emotions in the mind.
Right.
And it doesn't leave these black eyes or broken bones.
Right.
But the scars it creates can be just as, if not more profound and long lasting.
Totally. And it's not just one thing.
No.
It's everything from a colleague who's constantly undermining you behind your back
Yeah.
to a partner whose emotional neglect just leaves you feeling utterly alone.
Right.
Even a parent whose controlling behavior is just eroding your sense of self.
Uh-huh.
It can even be like social exclusion in a group of friends.
Oh, yeah. That's
all kind of facets of the same underlying issue.
Yeah, the systematic use of emotional pressure
Yeah.
to control and belittle and ultimately harm another person.
Yeah, and that's what we want to do in this deep dive is kind of pull back the curtain on this
Yeah.
and understand how it works and the impact that it has.
The mechanisms of it.
Yeah.
And the far-reaching impact.
So let's unpack this a little bit.
Okay.
What exactly is psychological bullying?
Right.
We know it's not a punch in the face.
Right.
So what are the defining characteristics?
So at its core, it's a sustained or repeated pattern of emotional pressure.
Okay.
And this pressure can be exerted through words, actions, or even just attitudes,
Interesting.
all aimed at controlling, belittling, or ultimately harming the recipient.
Okay.
And what's so fascinating here is this contrast with physical violence, right?
Yeah.
It often operates in the shadows.
Yeah.
Relying on subtle tactics that chip away at someone's well-being over time.
Yeah.
It's a constant drip of emotional poison.
Subtle but significant, right?
Yes, very much so.
And when we talk about the common forms of this,
Yeah,
it's not always like this overt aggression.
Exactly.
It's like you might immediately recognize.
that's right. Like the verbal abuse,
Right.
it's not necessarily shouting all the time.
Right.
It can be those constant little digs, the sarcastic remarks that are disguised as jokes,
Right.
the persistent ridicule that just wears you down.
Uh-huh.
And then you have what's sometimes called cold violence or emotional neglect.
Interesting.
Essentially, the deliberate withholding of emotional warmth and connection.
Yeah.
This might look like consistently ignoring someone,
Wow.
dismissing their feelings,
Yeah.
actively excluding them from things.
Yeah.
The impact here is often just a profound sense of isolation.
Yeah. That must be devastating
Oh, absolutely it is.
to feel so invisible and unimportant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we move into psychological manipulation.
Okay.
This can involve threats, subtle or not so subtle intimidation,
Right.
and various control tactics. The end result is often that the person being targeted starts to lose their sense of self-worth.
Right.
Their confidence is eroded by this constant pressure.
Yeah. Makes sense.
And finally, we have social bullying.
Okay.
This is where we see things like spreading rumors, deliberately isolating someone from a group.
Yeah.
It targets that fundamental need for social connection.
Right. So with all these different ways it can manifest,
Yeah.
why is this invisible weapon, as our source calls it, so incredibly dangerous?
Well, the invisibility itself is a huge part of the problem.
Okay.
Often these behaviors are happening behind closed doors or in ways that outsiders just don't readily see.
Yeah.
It can be hard to articulate what's happening.
Right.
You might even doubt your own perceptions.
Right.
How do you prove that someone is constantly belittling you with their sarcasm?
Right. It's not a physical injury.
It's not a physical injury
Yeah.
that's easily observed.
Exactly.
So the long-lasting effects can be easily dismissed or underestimated.
But they're very real.
Oh, they are very real.
They don't just disappear when the interaction ends.
They don't just disappear. No.
Yeah.
These wounds can fester and leave deep scars.
Right.
Think of it as a constant drip of emotional poison.
Yeah.
Each instance might seem small,
Right.
but cumulatively, it just erodes your sense of self,
Wow.
like water carving a stone.
So it's really the cumulative effect of this that can be so destructive.
Yes, it can be incredibly destructive.
Yeah.
It dismantles your self-confidence piece by piece.
Right.
It severely damages your ability to form healthy relationships,
Uh.
and it takes a significant toll on your overall mental health.
So there's clearly something more going on here than just random cruelty.
Yes.
What are the underlying psychological mechanisms
Right.
that make this so effective?
Well, psychological bullying isn't just about being mean.
Right.
It's often a calculated, even if unconscious, exploitation of our core psychological makeup.
Interesting.
Let's start with our evolutionary roots. As humans, we are inherently social creatures.
Right.
Our survival and our well-being have always depended on belonging to a group, on acceptance.
Right. So when bullying isolates or excludes you, it's hitting at a very primal fear.
Exactly. It disrupts that fundamental sense of social connection and security.
Wow.
Think about the example that our source gives: workplace ostracization.
Okay.
If you're consistently left out, you're ignored in team meetings, your ideas are dismissed.
Right.
It's not just a bad work day, it
Yeah.
leads to profound loneliness,
Yeah.
a feeling of helplessness,
Wow.
a significant drop in both motivation and self-confidence.
Yeah. So that sense of belonging,
Yeah.
which is such a core human need,
Yes.
is being attacked.
Yes, it is.
And then there's this idea of social comparison.
Yes.
How you see yourself in relation to others.
Right. So social comparison theory suggests that we often evaluate our own worth and abilities by looking at those around us.
Right.
Bullies understand this consciously or unconsciously. By constantly demeaning their victims, by making them feel inadequate in comparison, they chip away at their self-belief.
Yeah, it's like that classic line.
Yeah.
You can't do anything right.
Yeah, yes.
Repeat it often enough, you start to internalize that.
Yes. And that constant drip of negativity erodes your self-doubt.
Yeah.
And makes it harder for you to trust your own judgment and abilities.
Right.
It's a very effective way to undermine someone's sense of self-worth.
And then we need to consider the role of early experiences,
Yes.
which attachment theory helps us understand.
Right.
How do our childhoods make us more or less vulnerable
Yes.
to these kinds of experiences later in life?
Well, attachment theory highlights the importance of early relationships in shaping our emotional development and how we relate to others later in life.
Okay.
If you experience trauma in childhood, such as neglect or emotional abuse,
Right.
it can have lasting effects on your self-esteem
Yeah.
and your ability to form secure attachments. As a result, you might be more susceptible to psychological bullying in adulthood, either as a victim
Whoa.
or, unfortunately, sometimes as a perpetrator.
So someone who grew up with emotionally distant parents
Yeah.
might develop this deep-seated insecurity and hypersensitivity?
Right. They might crave validation and acceptance so strongly that they become more vulnerable to manipulation.
Wow.
Or they might misinterpret negative interactions, further reinforcing their low self-esteem,
Right.
making them more likely to either endure or, in some cases, repeat those harmful patterns.
It's so interesting how all of this stuff just kind of comes together
It does.
to create this really damaging long-term effect.
Yeah.
And speaking of long-term effects,
Yes.
what are some of the lasting consequences
Right.
that you see in people who've been subjected to psychological bullying?
Well, the long shadow of psychological bullying can be quite significant.
Yep.
We often see a range of mental health issues emerge.
Such as?
Anxiety and depression are very common, stemming from the persistent stress and emotional distress.
Right.
This can manifest as, chronic sadness, difficulty sleeping,
Right.
and tragically even suicidal thoughts in some cases.
Yeah, that's a stark reminder of how serious this is.
It is.
Yeah.
And alongside anxiety and depression, low self-esteem is almost a hallmark of prolonged psychological bullying.
Okay.
Victims internalize those negative messages,
Right.
coming to believe that they are fundamentally unworthy of love,
Right.
respect,
Wow.
or even basic kindness.
It's almost like they've been brainwashed in a way.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
In the most severe instances, the trauma can even lead to post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD,
Yeah.
with all of its associated symptoms like flashbacks, hypervigilance, emotional numbing.
So it's not just like feeling down.
No.
This is a genuine trauma response.
It is a genuine trauma response, and the impact doesn't stop at mental health.
Right.
It also profoundly affects social relationships. Trust becomes a major issue.
Makes sense.
Someone who has been repeatedly betrayed or belittled is naturally going to be more cautious, fearful of future harm
Yeah.
in their interactions with others.
Right.
This can then lead to social anxiety,
Yeah.
a fear of exclusion or criticism that can cause them to withdraw from social situations altogether.
Right. So it's like this vicious cycle.
It is a vicious cycle.
The bullying leads to isolation.
Yeah.
which then makes them even more vulnerable.
Exactly.
So given these potentially devastating effects, what can someone do if they find themselves in this situation?
Right.
How can they find strength and move forward?
Well, our source offers some really practical coping strategies.
Okay, great.
Let's start with strengthening self-awareness and confidence.
Okay.
Recognizing your own inherent worth separate from the opinions of others is a powerful first step.
Okay.
Accepting yourself with both your strengths and your weaknesses, and understanding that your value isn't determined by someone else's negativity can be incredibly liberating.
Yeah, I love that.
Developing independence.
Right.
Finding sources of satisfaction and self-worth from within rather than constantly seeking external validation.
Right.
Builds resilience.
So building that internal fortress.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's the importance of building a strong support system around you.
Right.
Finding someone you trust, a friend, a family member to talk to and to share your feelings with can provide immense relief.
Yeah, just having someone to listen and validate your experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And crucially, seeking professional help from a therapist can be invaluable.
Oh,
therapists have the tools and expertise
Right.
to guide you in processing the trauma and rebuilding confidence.
Yeah. And sometimes it's about setting boundaries.
Yes.
Which can be really tough
It can be tough.
when you've been systematically undermined.
Right, but it's essential. Learning to say no to people who are harmful or manipulative is a form of self-protection.
Right.
Defining your limits and communicating them clearly can disrupt those patterns of bullying.
Okay.
And sometimes the most powerful boundary you can set is to distance yourself completely from toxic relationships.
Right.
To walk away from people who repeatedly belittle or manipulate you.
Walk away.
Walk away.
That's so hard, but probably so necessary.
It is so hard, but it is often necessary.
And the source also mentions the importance of keeping a record,
Yes.
which almost seems counterintuitive in this invisible
I know.
form of harm.
It does, but
But
it can be incredibly helpful,
Okay.
especially in situations like workplace or school bullying.
Right.
Documenting specific incidents.
Okay.
Keeping emails, messages, even detailed notes of conversations with dates and times
Okay.
can provide concrete evidence if you need to defend yourself or
Right.
take further action.
So it's not just he said, she said.
Exactly.
You have something to refer to.
Yes, you do.
Okay. And finally, the source touches on taking legal action.
Yes.
When might that be appropriate?
Well, in specific cases, particularly those involving workplace harassment or domestic abuse,
Right.
psychological bullying can cross the line into legally actionable behavior.
Wow.
It's crucial for victims in these situations to seek legal counsel to understand their rights
Right.
and explore potential legal avenues for protection and recourse.
So even though it's invisible,
Yeah,
it's not without real-world consequences.
it is not.
Yeah.
There can be legal ramifications.
So as we start to wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
what's the ultimate takeaway here?
Well, I think the core message is that the damage inflicted by psychological bullying, though unseen, has a profound and lasting impact on people's behaviors.
Right.
Their choices, the entire trajectory of their lives.
Yeah.
However, it's also crucial to understand that healing and rebuilding are absolutely possible.
Okay, good.
Through acknowledging the harm, seeking support, and actively employing these coping strategies, you can gradually reclaim your well-being, heal your mental health, and rebuild healthier relationships.
And on a broader level, it seems like there's a real need for society to wake up to the seriousness of this.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to dismantle the ignorance and the misconceptions that often surround it.
Yeah.
Raising awareness, providing accessible support systems, and strengthening protections against this hidden form of violence are crucial steps in reducing its widespread harm.
So as you're listening to this, maybe take a moment to consider your own role.
Yeah.
How can you be more aware of these invisible wounds, both in yourself and in others around you?
That's a great question.
And what can we all do to foster environments where this kind of harm is less likely to take root?
That's something for everyone to think about.
Absolutely, Ron. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you next time.